He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Te hewa Māori ora ki te whai au, ki te ao marama kia ora, hui hui mai rā tātou katoa, and welcome back to our Māpuna podcast. This week, our guest is Michael Bennett, an award-winning screenwriter, author and director. He's the co-curator Māori for the Auckland Writers Festival. So much talent is going to be at the festival, Māori talent at the festival this year. They include Patricia Grace, Becky Manawatu, the amazingly talented Troy Kingi, in a special one-hour show where the audience will help Troy write and compose a new song in 1 hour. There will also be an interview with Hana Rāwhiti Maipi Clark by the talented actress Te Ore Ore Ngātai Melbourne, and Ngā Huia Te Awe Kōtuku will join the festival from overseas, as she's on a very special journey in remembrance of the 2/8 Māori Battalion. All that and more, as well as Michael's own work, and in particular, the work that he did with Teina Pora and the release of Teina Pora from prison all the way to this Privy Council in the UK. So that's Māpuna this week, our podcast with Michael Frederick Augustus Te Arawa Bennett. There's a story in his name as well. E te iwi e, whakarongo mai. The show today focuses on the Auckland Writers Festival, the billing that's been given to Waituhi o Tāmaki Makoto. The festival itself starts on May 14th. Its promotional push highlights a roll call of talent from across the arts. Booker Prize winner for 2023 Paul Lynch, actor Sam Neill, musician and a fan favourite of Māpuna, Troy Kingi, Indian politician and author Shashi Tharoor, plus generations of gifted Māori writers, including the likes of Patricia Grace to Becky Manawatu. Now that's just a taste of what you'll experience at the Auckland Writers Festival. Pulitzer Prize winners, bestsellers and more will attend, which will also include our guest today on Māpuna, award-winning screenwriter, author and director Michael Bennett is our kai kōrero on Māpuna today. Michael, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Julian. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Te uri o Ngāti Pikiao, Ngāti Whakaue, Te Arawa. Good to have you. I mentioned Te Arawa, and I know we're going to be talking about the Writers' Festival, but I do want to talk about the Te Arawa name, because it's a name that you hold. Michael, and you told me this, so I want to make sure I get this right. Michael Frederick Augustus Te Arawa Bennett.
That's right.
Tell me about the name.
It's such an honour to carry that on my shoulders. I was the youngest. I was the pōtiki of our family, and by the time I came around, I don't know that I was entirely expected, but I think everyone was happy to have me there, and they decided to give me a name for the ages, which included Te Arawa, but also included my grandfather, Frederick Augustus, who was the first Māori Bishop of Aotearoa. And it's an extraordinary legacy to have that as my name, but also, you know, the things that Frederick Augustus Bennett achieved in his lifetime, it's still trickling down to today, obviously. It's just an amazing thing to carry, really.
Yeah, I remember I studied Te Reo at university, and one of the works of art for Te Reo in the third year we had to study was a speech by Kepa Eho, master orator of Te Arawa, farewelling your grandfather,
Right.
Frederick Augustus Bennett. Beautiful. I'll tell you what, it was difficult to study because the language was just amazing. But he pays homage to your grandfather's. Oh, it's amazing.
That's amazing. My daughter, Matariki, who we will talk about because she's co-curator with me of the Māori sessions at the Writers' Festival. So she's so passionate about our past, and she's been digging into the archives, and she's found recordings of Frederick Augustus.
Yes.
I think it was like a mihi he did to the 28th Battalion returning or going away at Tamatikapua. And she just came to me and played it, and she was crying because, you know, my generation, I don't have the reo, neither do any of my siblings. And it was the first time that she'd heard, you know, one of her whānau speaking, but just what you were saying about, you know, the the particular way that he phrased and the way that he spoke the language, she was just blown away by it. Yeah.
There's te reo, and then there's their reo.
Right. Yeah.
You know, master orators, and the structure and phrasing is just it blows me away. Yeah. So if you don't mind, I just wanted to delve a bit deeper into the whānau, because you carry, as you say, illustrious names, your middle names, even your first name. But the Bennett name is a big name, not just in Te Arawa, but also in Māoridom, obviously through Frederick Augustus, but also through your father and uncles and their contribution to World War II. And we've just come past Anzac Day, which I'm sure is always a big occasion for your whānau as well. So, are you of that Bennett family, many of whom went to World War II?
Yes. So my dad was one of 7 brothers who went away to World War II. There was 3 brothers in the 28th in the battalion. Uncle Manu was in the chaplaincy. Uncle Henry was a medic. My dad was in the 485 squadron. He was a Spitfire pilot. And my uncle Paro was in the Navy. So 7 brothers went to war, and extraordinarily 7 brothers came back. It's not a story that it was usual for Māori whānau or for any whānau, really. And yes, I look back on what those young men did. My youngest daughter, Matariki, now is older than Dad was when he went to war.
Wow.
And she's only 21. My son is 28 now, which is the age that Uncle Charles was when he became commander of the Māori battalion. Yeah. And for those young men to go to the other side of the world, to knowing nothing of what they were going to encounter, but just knowing that they had to do something about the greatest wrong that the world had ever encountered. And there was a moment, Julian, when I went to, Dad, when he came back, like so many of our whānau, just didn't really talk about it. I'd hear him talking when Uncle Albie, who was in the 28th, would come down and they'd talk late into the night, but he wouldn't really share stuff with us. So I had my imaginations in my head about what he did, but it became very tangible for me when I went to the London Museum a few years ago, and they had a exhibition on the Spitfires. And they had a Spitfire that was bisected vertically down the middle, like it was cut in half. And I couldn't believe it. It was just this, it was like 6 V8 engines lined up and this little seat. It was basically like riding a motorbike with 6 V8 engines and covered in tinfoil because of the weight to power ratio. Yeah. The protection around the pilot was almost nothing. The metal was so thin. So I can't imagine what he could have heard when, the screaming of the engines.
Just to make a note here, we're talking about Michael's father because he was a fighter pilot.
That's right, Spitfire pilot.
Yeah. And my understanding is, and we had a brief chat about this before we came on air, but my understanding, there weren't many Māori fighter pilots.
No,
is my understanding.
Yeah, you pointed out that in the British forces there were maybe a couple, but definitely when I've seen photos of Dad and his squadron, the 485 squadron, he was the only brown face amongst a sea of white. Yeah, so, and I think it's unusual for, Māori would definitely they were lining up to get into the 28th to go and fight side by side with their brothers and their friends, but to be an individual fighter pilot and alone in the sky is an unusual thing for a Māori, I think.
Yeah. You know what I'm thinking, right? There's a documentary in this.
I think so. I think the story of the 7 brothers, it's a story that both Matariki and I want to tell so much.
Even your dad's story, right? Your uncle Charles, Moihi, as you said, who became a commanding officer, went on to be one of the finest diplomats and ambassadors for the country.
High Commissioner to Malaysia.
That's right. I believe a path crafted for him by Apena Ngata, is my understanding.
Right. Quite possibly. Because obviously Apena Ngata and my grandfather were very, very close and part of the Young Māori Party. And
Yeah. And of course, you said there's 19. And you think of the contribution of the family. I mean, Henry Bennett, oh my gosh, my wife's a GP. So, in Māori health circles, Henry Bennett's name is obviously mentioned a lot. I met a lovely old kaumata, you know who this is. I remember John Bennett, Mokonui Arangi Bennett. The family and the contribution of the family, but also obviously education is an important part of the Bennett legacy.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Was in expectations for you as a son of someone who was of that whānau legacy, of the Bennett whānau?
Yeah, I don't know expectation as in a birch on your back at all, but definitely, just a sense of prioritising and of making your way in the world to be as good a person as you can be. I think, and that came from both sides. Mum was an extraordinary writer herself. She actually met my dad. I know we're going to get to the Writers Festival sometime soon, Julian. But, she actually met my dad when she was writing her thesis on Frederick Augustus. So Dad had just got back from the war, and he turned up at the house, and there was this young blonde woman on the front porch talking to his dad, and he asked my Auntie Kura, who's that? And Auntie Kura says, that's my good friend Elaine Westerman. And so my mum absolutely gave me she was a great writer, gave me the love of words, and because I was a little bit after the other kids, I had a lot of time with her, and we used to do, silly little games of, like, I would test her on a page when I was 3 years old, on a page of the dictionary to see how many words she knew, and she'd do the same to me. And
really,
so definitely that sense of education and the importance of being the best person you can be was definitely from both sides.
I guess we should get to the festival, but in a segue to that, how did you find your place in the festival?
So this is our second year. So I'm the co-curator Māori of the festival with my daughter Matariki, so Matariki. I mean, we're both writers. Matariki is a poet. She's part of the New Zealand and Australasian Championship poetry team Ngāhine Pūkōrero,
yes.
I'm sure you've seen them.
Yes, I have.
Who have revolutionised performance poetry in New Zealand, and who they're all 4 young women. They're all fully bilingual. They break into karakia and karanga, and in the middle of their poems. And there's a very famous Black Lives Matter video where they did this extraordinary poem about the loss of language and the Native Schools Act. And so she's a poet and very politically kind of like active, and so I guess for both of us, we both have kind of a love of words and a kind of belief in the power of words to move and to change and to...
apologies, because we'll go all over the place with me, okay? So you're right, they're absolutely amazing. And there are now, and this is a bit of their legacy, I think, is they call it slam poetry in the States, but we call it word poetry here, or quarter poetry, spoken word poetry here. They've inspired a lot of young Māori to follow in their footsteps now. And I don't know if you know, but there's a group out of Waiorea, Western Springs. I was going to say Western Heights, that's the Te Arawa influence coming Western Springs School, Waiorea. They won the Australian New Zealand Championship this year.
Rehe Kōrero.
Yeah. We had them on the hui this year.
At the Writers Festival.
Okay. They're
amazing young group.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So sorry, keep going. So
Matariki and I, so this is our second year as curators of the festival. And I think what's just so awesome about working with my daughter, it's just a real Gen Z meets, what are we, boomers? It's the two different energies coming together, and she doesn't hold back. It's like if I come up with a suggestion that's just not going to fly, she doesn't hide her. And so we have a real kind of a mix of the interests that we want to pursue, but I guess what we do have is we both have a really shared passion for about the kinds of areas. What we wanted to do was to really make our sessions less your traditional Writers Festival sessions where an author is talking about their
being
books.
Interviewed by someone and they're sitting on a stage and
that's right,
and they might do a reading or something.
Exactly, which is great. That's awesome. And me as an author, like, I love it. Like, I kind of love to go and be able to talk about my stuff, that's all really important for a Writers Festival. It's what the audience expects, but we wanted to sort of take it off into a little bit of a different branch, really. And we really wanted to, so the theme for our curations both years is He ahi kei taku korokoro, that there's a fire burning in my throat. So really, we like to kind of explore stuff that we think is important to talk about and curate our sessions around that and get together extraordinary people with fires burning in their throats to talk about stuff that we think matters.
That's more important now than ever, don't you think? Given what is happening,
I think
not just in the world, but particularly in Aotearoa at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's a brave thing to be able to do, I think, because, as you say, writers' festivals, there's a view and perspective about what writers' festivals traditionally are. But I think, particularly for Māori are looking for something to be in their faces, that audiences can not just engage in, but also, be inherently involved in and passionately involved in and want to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what we really hope is that with our sessions, it's like, for people who don't necessarily think that a writers' festival is made for them or designed for them, maybe I hope that we can make them think again, really, that there's, people who they can recognise and they're talking about stuff that affects them on stage. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I get asked to go along and do a couple of interviews and I get kind of blown away by it because, me of little intelligence finds themselves in a forum like this. And I think people think it might be a little bit geeky, and it's not. It's not that at all. And in particular, the perspective and the pursuit that you and Matariki are following with the Māori curation that you are doing sounds like something that would appeal very much so to a Māori audience. Who are the kinds of people? So we talked about He Kōrero. Who are some of the other ones that you're hoping to and have got to be a part of the festival, the Māori curation that you're doing? Yeah. So we've got a number of sessions, and they cover a range of different topics. One that I'm particularly, it's interesting you mentioned my uncle Sir John before. There's one session that we've got which is the Kohanga Reo generation is here. So Julian, we've taken a really, I guess, open view of what a writer is or what a kaituhi is. And so, for instance, in the Kohanga generation, we've got Hana Rafiti Maipi Clark, who is the youngest person to write laws for New Zealand in 170 years or something, and having a voice like hers on stage, it's a different way of looking at writing, but what she's going to have to say, I just cannot wait to hear it. She's on stage with Te Ori Ngatai in Melbourne, who's an extraordinary young actor, just recently been in The Convert. Both of them fluent, both of them such powerful young women that are kind of doing things to change the country. And so that's, my uncle Matariki is a product of the Kohanga Reo generation, but my uncle was...
Can I say, I'm lucky because I got to engage with Sir John through Te Miritana, actually. Sir John Mokonui Bennett's name isn't mentioned a lot now in terms of the Kohanga Reo movement. It's a name that Sir Tipene O'Regan has this great quote and kōrero. He says we must remember to remember. And I think sometimes we forget names of people who are involved in certain movements. And obviously Sir John was pivotal, foundational in the Kohanga Reo movement. So I'm glad you mentioned your uncle. It's not being whakahihi about whānau. It's a name that we need to remember. So thank you for mentioning it. I appreciate it.
We've got, so another one of our sessions is Te Ara Ki Te Ora, How to Survive, which again, as you say, at this particular juncture in our world and in our country, I think this is an incredibly important kōrero. So we've got looking really at there's a lot going on in our world right now. There's conflict everywhere, and we as Māori are facing particular challenges with a raft of new kind of policies that are incoming. This session, I guess, is looking at Māori perspectives on how do we get through where we are now and get out to the other side. So we've got some amazing speakers. We've got Rob Mukaraka. I don't know if you've come. Yes, so
I know Rob. Yeah.
Incredible
relation
actor.
of mine from up north.
And his story is I think really important for many young Māori to know about, because he tried to commit suicide by cop.
Yeah, and Shot Bro was his show.
Yeah. And then he survived, thank God. I've worked with Rob. He's an amazing actor and an amazing speaker, and he's turned the darkest moment of his life into a theatre show that is helping so many young Māori with mental health issues, and he's touring it around marae and
schools, Māori schools. He's got Māori schools,
Extraordinary. We've got Airana Nārewa, who just best-selling author from Taranaki, he speaks so eloquently about the effect of colonisation on his iwi and his whānau, and Nicola Toki, who's the chief executive of Forest and Bird, who's, her approach to, because the stuff that we're facing is not just particular to us, it's also global. The world is getting warmer, and so her kind of, I guess, her perspective on Māori approaches to environment and reclaiming the well-being of the earth.
Okay,
yeah.
So she won't mention the controversial John Oliver,
the bird hijacking, yeah. And Dr. Emma Espiner is so obviously, like, literally, Emma's this extraordinary speaker and writer, but also every day her job is to help people survive. Yeah. So I think it's going to be an amazing session. Yeah,
this is so. The thing I was going to say is I hear you mention those names, and as I've just said, some of whom I know pretty well. What I'm getting a sense of is that yes, it's a writers' festival, but this is different. This is different. And what I've found is, so we've seen things like the evolution of M9. There's a real audience for this. Hundreds of people are turning up to these kind of things. Yes, to hear and also to engage, as I mentioned earlier. But there's a real appetite for people to want to get to a forum and hear and see and take things in and learn. But also to have the kōrero afterwards.
That's right.
And keep that kōrero going.
Yeah.
Which is see, I'm trying to think of my mind when that kind of started. Is it a post-COVID thing, do you think? Or it just seems to be that there's a real appetite for it now, particularly Māori.
Yeah, I mean, 10,000 people gathered at Kingitanga, at the heart of Kingitanga earlier this year, and again in Kahungunu soon, eh?
Yeah.
And I mean, we're facing stuff, but in a way, it's galvanising us. I think and I guess our sessions this year, we really wanted to keep that in mind. That this is a time when we got to be talking about these big important things, and awesome. But also it's like, I mean, for me, Matariki and I mean, I don't want the listeners to be thinking that it's only on this level of doom and gloom, and it's not. But that's not what it is at all. But it's about finding ways forward, but also for Matariki and I, what's really important is not just to have writers and thinkers talking about things retrospectively, but to have creativity, happen on stage. So you mentioned Troy Kingi, and this is a session that we're incredibly passionate and excited about. A waiata in an hour. So Troy, one of our living legends and a taonga. This session is Troy comes on stage. He has no idea what he's going to do for the hour. The audience gives him a lyric, a line of to include in the song, and gives him a genre. And there's no one in New Zealand who's better at jumping genres than Troy. So who knows what he's going to get? Hopefully, he's not going to get like.
7 Spanish angels.
Yeah. But whatever it is, I know that Troy is just going to run with it. And then in an hour with the help of the audience. So, I mean, who knows? Like, we're encouraging everyone to, turn up and be prepared to maybe get up on stage and be part of a hand-clapping choir or harmonising. Last year, this extraordinary event happened. We did another session of waiata in an hour with Kings and Rory Noble and Chai. And partway through, as they were composing their song, working with the audience, and the audience was harmonising, and Kings stopped and he said, "Is there a bird in here?" And there was an old kaumatua down the back, and he was whistling. He was doing the whistling of the.
Wow!
I've forgotten the bird, but it's the first bird in the morning out east. Maybe you can help me, Gillian. I can't remember what it was, and because the genre that they'd been given was a love song, and the line was about the birds singing in the morning.
Wow!
And this amazing old kaumatua was reproducing bird song.
Wow.
And so Kings pulled him up on stage, recorded his bird song, and then recorded he recorded a karakia to start the song, and
wow,
amazing things happen. So we're really excited about Troy's session.
I might pop along, see if I can get a lyric and get in a Troy Kingi song. Get some royalties. And of course, Troy, I'll just take a slight tangent. Troy Kingi, another Te Aute boy like many of the Bennetts. Carry on, Michael.
There's that session. We've got an amazing session with 3 wahine toa that I think is going to be confrontational and emotional and beautiful. It's called I Walk Backwards into the Future with My Eyes on the Past, that great whakatauki. And what it really is talking about Māori female creativity across different generations. And the 3 extraordinary women that Matariki and I admire so much, the Nahuia Te Awe Kotuku.
Oh, yes.
And she'll actually, interestingly, she's going to be zooming in because she's going to be at casino at the celebrations, because it's the 70-something of the casino.
I think Bom Gilly's the only remaining 2/8 Māori battalion veteran. I hear he's going.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. At 99.
Yeah. And the Huia will be coming in from there. Miriama McDowell, who's a once-in-a-generation talent and an extraordinary actor. I'm incredibly proud that I saw Miriama when she was still at Toi Whakaari, and I gave her first role in front of a camera. So we go back a long way.
Wow.
And she actually, when she was first starting out, she nannied my children. So she's got this really... so it's not nepotism. She is a once-in-a-generation performer.
We call her Fire now because she played Whenua, of course.
Yes. No, absolutely. And so Miriama represents, I guess, the middle years of Māori female creativity. And then Manaia Tūwhari Hoani, who is part of Ngāhine Pūkōrero. Yes. She's poetry royalty. She is the great-granddaughter of Hone Tūwhari, and an extraordinary woman. She's not only an amazing poet and an amazing speaker, but she's also an amazing teacher. She teaches poetry in the north, trying to, as you said, that these they're passing on the skills to other people. And she's actually taught me once. I don't know why I thought that I could ever do stand-up poetry, and I can't. But I did do a session where Manaia and the other young women worked with a bunch of us novices to try and put together a poem. And, oh my goodness, Manaia especially was just this most extraordinary teacher. So she's the younger generation. And really, so that session is really just kind of exploring what matters at different ages, how does that change, and what stays the same? What are you always fighting for?
It reminds me of do you remember a play called Ngā Pou Wahine?
I do.
Similar kind of approach, multi-generational.
Right.
3-woman approach. Then I think of Nancy Brunning. Wow. Dearly departed Nancy Brunning. But the reason why I admire that approach again is because a couple of things. I was recently at a hui. It was a food sovereignty hui. They held it to my heard of about 300 people. Dr. Jessica Hutchins, we interviewed for that hui. 85% of the people that turned up to that hui, wahine Māori. And it says a lot, I think, about, you look at the Kohanga Reo now, who are the most of the teachers in Kohanga Reo? Wahine Māori. There's a huge percentage of our wahine who are involved in these community-led initiatives. But without them, they wouldn't be as successful as they are now. So I think it's appropriate that we have this approach here. And as I said, it takes me back to that Ngā Pou Wahine play, the show, which I think is really important.
Fantastic. And the last session that we have on the last day of the festival is one of the things I love about festivals is when writers, there's a session that they often have on opening nights where writers speak to a theme, and it becomes very personal. It's not about their books at all. It becomes very personal, and it's often incredibly emotional. And so we wanted to do one of those, but also to go beyond, to include Māori speakers and writers, but also to include Pacifica, because part of our world, but also Indigenous from across the world who are coming to the festival. So the final session that we have is The Day I Was Born, where a group of different writers from very different backgrounds talk about that particular moment in their life that changed everything. There's the before and then there's the after. And The Day I Was Born, it might mean literally the day they were born,
but awesome.
It's probably not. It's probably a pivotal moment. So Rob Mokaraka again is speaking. Yep. Tosiata Avia is speaking. Rehe Kōrero, the spoken word from Waioria that you know of. Deborah Dank, who's First Nations Australian, she's Gudanji people, multi-award-winning author. Jerry Pinto, an Indian poet and novelist, and Joshua Ip from Singapore. So, I think we can just expect very unexpected stories, lots of tears, lots of emotion.
Yeah.
Lots of honesty.
I think that's a great cope-up. Wow! Oh, well, this is going to be awesome. I better make sure we get along. Do you mind if we talk a little bit about you? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
The only reason I ask is because you reminded me earlier, and I'd forgotten about the book that you wrote about Tēnā Pora. And so I'm just really interested to talk a couple of things around your own career here. How did you find out about Tēnā Pora? What compelled you to want to write a book about that case in particular?
So there's a moment that I always think of as a tectonic shift in my life, Julian, which was when Tim McKinnell, who was the private investigator who ultimately really saved Tēnā. He was a forgotten man in prison for decades. And Tim came to me and he showed me a couple of hours there was 9 hours of the interviews with Tēnā when he in a South Auckland police station, he was interviewed by two senior cops, two senior detectives for over a period of 5 days without a lawyer present. And Tim came and showed me those interviews. And honestly, it was one of the most confronting moments of my life. My Tēnā on those interview tapes was 17 years old, young Māori boy who was just so clear he didn't have a clue what was going on. For instance, when they first asked Tēnā to describe the victim, Susan Burdett, he says, she was blonde and chubby, kind of fat-looking. Susan was actually brunette, athletic. At that moment, the cops should have opened the door and said, "Go home. You don't know what you're talking about." But they didn't. They persisted. So from watching those few hours of interview tapes, I just knew something terrible had happened here, and that I had to do whatever I could do as a writer, as a director, as a creator, to help Tim doing what he had to do as an investigator, trying to get justice for Tēnā.
How did Tim find you, or you find Tim?
I keep meaning to ask Tim that. Maybe he saw some documentaries that I'd made that made him think that I would be passionate about Tēnā's case. Maybe he'd seen some of my work as a filmmaker. But he certainly from that moment when I saw those tapes, it was like there was no going back for me. I went home and
Is that right?
I said to Jane, this is going to be a really long, hard haul, because Tēnā was still in prison. Like there was, he'd had two appeals. He'd basically used up his appeals in New Zealand. So there was basically only one route forward, which was the Privy Council in London, and the bar is so high to get there. And for all of us who got involved, like Paula Penfold and Eugene Bingham. All of us who got so passionate about it, it was just like there was no guarantees. This could be a long, hard fight and given the history of Tēnā in the justice system, the odds were it wasn't going to be a good outcome. I guess the moment
you would have had young kids at the time, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my son, was 17 at the time, and so when I was watching those tapes of Tēnā, who was 17 at the time. I was seeing my son sitting in that cell being, and I can't imagine. It was heartbreaking. And that a weekend later or 2 weekends later, Tim took me to Pāremoremo to meet Tēnā for the first time. And that, by then I knew that he was innocent. And there was this extraordinary moment that happened, Julian, so Tēnā and I Tim kind of left us to have a chat and to get to know each other a little bit. And Taina and I were talking about our he had a 2-year-old girl when he went to prison. So he had her at the age of 15, and he was an amazing dad. He had no, he basically stopped going to school at about 12 or 13, so he had no skills. But he did, in order to look after his daughter, he did everything that he could to look after her, which is, one of the reasons why he ended up in the, making a false confession, was to try and get a reward to look after his daughter. But so by that stage, when I first met Taina, Chanel had a son, Benson. So he had a grandson, and he was talking about his grandson, I was talking about my kids. And as we were sitting, I don't know if you've been to Paremurumu, to Unit 6, which is the low security. If you've been a model prisoner, that's where you get to, and that's where Taina had been for several years. So in the visiting area, it's a series of picnic tables outside, and so you're right beside the razor wire fence, a 6-metre high razor wire fence, and we're either side of a picnic table and just chatting away, and this ladybird landed on the table between us, and the ladybird started to crawl its way over towards Taina, and he kept on talking and just raised his finger, and I thought, okay, this little bug is going to get squished. But what actually happened was he lowered his finger down, and the ladybird climbed up onto his finger, and he raised the finger, and as he was still talking, he went and blew on the ladybird, and it spread its wings, and it flew out through the razor wire fence to the freedom that he wasn't going to have for another 5 years. Wow. And if I didn't know already, but I did, but if I hadn't known already that this young man was innocent, that moment told me everything. He couldn't hurt a bug. And it became an incredibly passionate thing for me and my family.
You've just reminded me of a story. There was an author who wrote a book about, his name's Paul Moon, who wrote a book about a tohunga, Hoiba Kireopa from Tūhoe. And it's still, my understanding is, and I'm sure Paul will let me know if I've got this wrong, but my understanding was they still weren't sure whether or not Paul was the right guy to write the book on this tohunga Pākehā, not Māori, historian. But they went into the forest and into the bush, and Hoiba was an acknowledged tohunga, rongoā, manamataka, nature and their environment. And they walk in, and then apparently it was a kupa, was it a wood pigeon or a bird just flew out from the trees, landed on Paul's shoulder, sat there for a while as the old kaumātua was talking to him. Yeah. Once the kaumātua finished, it flew away again, and then the old fellow said, "Oh, yeah, you're the
You'll do."
But it's funny how those things happen, eh? Yeah. It's funny how those things happen. Yeah. So have you kept in touch with Taina?
Yeah. It's it was an extraordinary thing to go through. Those, maybe it took up 8 or 9 years of all of our lives, and there was a moment there when we finally got to the Privy Council, and I went to the Privy Council, and it's quite odd at the Privy Council. It's quite different to New Zealand courts. You can actually take in your phones. You could be live streaming it. But what I was doing was I was texting back to Taina back in New Zealand, because he was still, he'd been paroled by then, but he was still a convicted murderer. He couldn't hold a passport. So I was sort of like, as the trial was progressing, I was texting back to Taina, and it was incredible, Julian, honestly. Like, within half an hour of going in there, seeing these 4 Law Lords and Dame Sian Elias, so the great New Zealand
former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court,
so she was part of the panel of the Privy Council. Within half an hour, it was just so clear, like almost literally the judges were saying this man should never have been arrested, let alone convicted, let alone spend 21 years in prison. What the hell is going on? So, I was texting back to Taina. He was saying, "Oh, how's it going, bro?" And I didn't want to get his hopes up, because he had been brutalised by the justice system so many times, and there was no guarantees. So the best I could say is your team's incredible. It's feeling really good. And I guess one of the most extraordinary moments of my career was the night 6 months after that, where Taina and his family were at our place, along with Tim and his lawyers, and so many other people that had been big supporters, and for the decision that was live streamed from the Privy Council, at our house with our family, just to have this moment of seeing a man being given his life back, yeah, I don't think anything is ever going to compare in my career ever.
Yeah. I was going to say, because once you do something like that, where do you go?
Yeah.
And maybe that explains the go-go ninjas thing. Like, you do something completely...
Yeah.
you go to completely different things, because it's hard to top something like that.
Yeah,
Michael.
I can't say that I'm incredibly planned in my career. It's just it's the next thing that grabs hold of me and won't let me go. Tainer is good. Back to your question, he's good now. He has, he's with his family that he loves. He's got people who are looking out for him and who have his back, which he never had before. And it's always going to be a challenge for Tainer. He has a brain injury. He's a victim of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which is, in actual fact, probably we have no idea how many people in our jails suffer from that. But the odds are the only country that's done any decent sort of surveying into FASD is Canada. And what they know in Canada is that at least 40% of the prison population have FASD, which explains so much. One of the big symptoms of FASD is the inability to understand consequences of actions, which explains a lot of offending, in my opinion. Yeah. And the possibility is very likely that our rates are higher because actually statistics say that New Zealand women drink a lot more than Canadian women. Yeah. So he has a brain injury, and life is always going to be a challenge for him. But he has his freedom, and he has his family, and he has people who are looking out for him. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. You mentioned earlier, off here, that when you're writing, you look for the through line. This was your advice to me, because not saying I'm going to be an author by any stretch, but going through a bit of study that I'm doing at the moment, and I was discussing with you about how I figure things out and all that kind of thing, and prospectively looking to write a book at some stage on the topic that I'm really interested in. You talk about looking for the through line. But is that not just an approach to writing? Is that also a bit of an approach to cope-up that you do to life, is trying to find the through line?
Yeah.
Some people call it the Ehor line. It's a navigational line.
Yeah.
Where you're not really, there's an island, and you're trying to find your way through to it. Is that a fair description, do you think, of the way in which you undertake things?
I think I think you can't help, there's certain writers who start with a theme and then build a story around it. Like for me, I'm always drawn to characters and to ideas, and what I believe is that I can't help the themes that emerge, because I'm never going to tell a story that's that doesn't reflect what I believe about the world, and what I'm passionate about, and the things that I want to celebrate about the world, about how magnificent we are as human beings, as a people, as a country, but also the stuff we've got to work on. That's always going to come up in my work, no matter what.
Light and shade.
Yeah, totally. And I think I think chaos theory says that you lurch around and the wind blows you and you go from one place to the other, but actually when you look back there is a path, and that path is who you are and what you want to say, and that will always come out.
And to come back to the festival a little bit in a weird way, but I'll get to the point eventually. Because it'd be interesting working with your daughter. I'm not sure I could do that just quietly. My daughter's 19. I'm not sure we'd be able to work on something so important together. Or maybe, you never know. But it also must be a sense of pride. That's, I've said this a lot on this show, but apples don't fall far from trees sometimes, You and your mum, your daughter and you.
Yeah. Well, this is... I mean, I've done a lot with Matariki now. We co-wrote and co-directed a short film together about Patuparihi, which was just an extraordinary experience. So we co-wrote the film with my partner Jane. Matariki and I co-directed. Jane produced it. My son composed the music. My son Tihima composed the music, and my daughter Mahina was a costume designer. So it was a real family, and it was just such an extraordinary experience to be part of. Matariki, this. I've got some miles on the road, so there's stuff that I can teach her, but inevitably she always teaches me so much more. She's just this extraordinary powerhouse of emotion and belief and passion. And, I've done a lot of teaching, and I think that's one of the biggest things for me is that yes, you can pass on stuff to other people, but actually it's what you get back is so much more. But both having to enunciate to the person that you're working with the stuff that you maybe know and your skills, but also to just be able to like live with their minds and how they see the world, which is so different to ours, and we have to understand that. This is the new. We've given this generation a world to inherit, and I think they're the right generation to deal with it because they're going to fix up the stuff that we've made mistakes about because they're an extraordinary generation.
Yeah. Yep. No, you're right. And you mentioned the Kohangareo generation. I hear a phrase a lot. They're ready. They're ready. Michael, thank you. Tēnā koe. Thank you for coming and being a part of the program. Thank you for talking about the festival. I should say that the festival starts, as mentioned earlier, on May 14 here in Tāmaki Makaurau, Ngā Waituhi o Tāmaki Makaurau. Our thanks to Michael Frederick Augustus Te Aroha for being our guest, and also to Matariki, who we're hoping could be here. No doubt she can sit in judgment of both of us. And she hears the show. We wish you all the best. Awesome. Not only about that, but also future mahi as well. And thank you for listening to the program this week. We will have more next week on Māpuna. E ki ana te kōrero. Ko te toka i a kiha he toka whitianga rā. Ko te toka i Māpuna. Ko tāu e ki te ai ko te ripukau. Te hewa Māori ora. Kia tātou katoa.